and spiritual seekers, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to do a kind of another witchy video. This one is going to be all about divination. So what is divination? So depending on the different culture and history and the different tools, it kind of gives a little bit of a different explanation. But what divination really is a tool to either communicate with spirits of the dead, of guides, divine energy, so different deities, anything kind of astrological, not of our physical world that you want to communicate with. Divination is a way to do that. So there are many different ways of doing divination and different tools that can be associated with that. This list that I'm going to do today is not by far exclusive or completely inclusive of every type that there is out there. Every culture and point in history had a different way that they did divination or some form of it. Some of those has carried on into modern times, some have changed and altered and kind of got reevaluated and evolved into different types and different ways of doing it into the modern time. But long story short, there's many things you can do and different tools that you can use for divination purposes. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a kind of disclaimer on that you do not need a tool to do divination. You can do it intuitively. A lot of people do. Myself, when I'm talking to spirits and people of the dead, I don't typically use tools. I use my intuition. That's how it comes to me. That's how I developed it. And that's the way I do it. I don't need a tool to do that. I also find that new people that are coming into witchcraft or, spirituality don't really trust their intuition, or they can't really tell what their intuition is versus their imagination versus their ego, etc. So a divination tool can help you kind of dissect and interpret what is being told to you. Second disclaimer that I want to make is not all divination tools are going to work for you or for somebody else. The way to find the divination tool that's going to work best for you is just trying them out. And they don't necessarily have to be yours. If somebody has a divination tool that they allow other people to use, like I have a lot of tarot decks that aren't my go-to deck, so they're free for anybody to use. I can clean them after and no big deal. So if you know someone that uses a tool that they don't mind you trying, give it a try. At least that way you're not spending a ton of money or making a ton of crap that you're not going to end up using. So if you know someone or know a place that have things that you can try and test out, then absolutely do that. Not all divination tools are going to work for you. They may work for other people, and if it doesn't work for you, there's nothing wrong with you. It's nothing wrong with how you're doing it. It's not that the spirits aren't connecting with you or any of that other BS that you might see people talk about. It just doesn't work for you. There's many of these. There's ones I have that I'm going to show as an example that do not work for me as a divination tool. They just don't. And that is perfectly fine. So in this video, I'm going to go over the common divination tools. And in follow-up episodes, I'm going to go in more depth in each tool on how it's used, the history, etc. And some of them, I'm going to be doing some DIYs on how I'm making my own. So to start off with this video, I'm going to go over a list of common divination tools. So for some of them, I have to show an example. Some I don't have because I just don't use them, or I'm going to be making them in a future video for DIY. So there's really no point in buying one to show you for this video. I'll show you in the next one, but I'll show a picture just for an example. So one of the most common divination tools that you will see is tarot cards. This is a very popular one. Tarot is a very common divination tool. I'm a professional tarot reader, so I obviously like tarot. It's my #1 divination tool. And there are many types of tarot cards. These are just some of them. This is the Everyday Witch Tarot. This is my favorite. Some of them are upside down. This is my #1 deck, but that's just because it works personally for me. I had to buy, I think, probably a dozen decks before I found one that I really connected with and that it works for me first shot every time without guessing, without having to really work at it. So buying a deck, it may not necessarily work for you the first time. Try a couple different decks, and sometimes it just doesn't work. One of the staple characteristics of tarot is they have the major arcana and the minor arcana. So there's usually 1 to 12 major cards, and then there's the suits afterwards. Most common decks have cups, coins, swords, and wands. That's the most common, but there are so many decks. Artists have different interpretations of the art, so every deck is a little bit different. This deck, for example, the Vampire Tarot, uses something called swords and staffs. And the art is obviously a lot different than a traditional tarot deck. There's nothing wrong with them. I read with these, no problem, but this deck will just read a different side of a message than my witchy deck, for example. So try different decks, traditional decks, non-traditional decks, a little bit out there decks. You never know what's going to connect with you and really work for you. You just gotta explore. Probably the second most common divination tool you'll see is oracle decks. Oracle decks are kind of like the, you know, the sweet little step cousin of the tarot cards. I find people who use oracle decks either don't want to commit to a tarot deck, or they just don't connect with them with all the different, you know, rules and whatever when they're trying to start out it. Oracle decks are typically very straightforward. You pick out the card, it gives you a meaning. Some of them even have the meaning written right on it, so they're very easy. Oracle decks are limited, though, on how detailed and how far of a reading you can actually get. Oracle decks are great if you're looking for just like a yes or no answer, or just a straight answer of like, what do I need to work on today? Boom, straight answer. So they're a great accessory to tarot decks. When I do my tarot readings, I use oracle decks as kind of an accessory, but they're still great tools. And just like tarot decks, oracle decks come in all different colors, shapes, designs. There's no rules to what an oracle deck could be. And I mean, really, there's no hard rule on what a tarot deck can be either. But oracle decks are truly the eye of the beholder out of whoever made these and designed them. So keep in mind, an oracle deck's meaning is specific to that deck. Unlike with tarot, the meaning and the definitions of the traditional structure of the tarot deck can be carried over into just about any deck. Oracle is very specific to whoever created it and designed that deck. So the next common tool you're going to see is probably a pendulum. I've seen them a lot online lately for whatever reason, but this is a tool, for example, that does not work for me. It just doesn't. I've tried it many times. I created this one thinking that would be like more in tune with my energy and all that kind of stuff, but it just doesn't work for me, and that's perfectly fine. But a pendulum is pretty straightforward. The only kind of rule that there is there's going to be some type of weight, and this could be anything. It could be a ring, it could be a stone pendulum like this, it could be literally a piece of gum on the bottom, whatever, something that can just be weighted. And then there's obviously going to be a string. Most commonly you'll see a chain on like store-bought ones, but any string will work as long as it's straight and you can put the weight on the end. That's all you need. This one just happens to have a handle. That is not necessary. Just a string would work perfectly fine. If you're using a straight pendulum with just a straight string, you would want to stabilize your arm as much as you can on a stable surface like a table to try to mitigate any excess movement from your arm. This is where having a handle or having a free floating pendulum, so like free floating in a jar, or you can get the nice like arched holders. And this is supposed to mitigate any extra movement that's coming from your arm affecting the pendulum. Pendulums typically are used best for yes or no answers because there is limited motion. It has the front and back, circles, left and right, might do some winky wonky kind of movements, but that's really it. It can't really do much more than that. So the questions that it can answer are a little bit limited, but this is very, very popular tool, very easy to use and make. Again, you can just any weight on a string, you're good to go. Also, if you see my makeup on the back of my hand, I'm sorry, I forgot to wash it off. But pendulum, very easy, very common. The next tool I'm going to talk about is not as common anymore, but it used to be a long time ago. The crystal ball is the historical kind of fortune-telling tool. This is the one you see in the old movies, and they still make the old signs for like Halloween and stuff, and it all has the gypsy with the crystal ball. Very old school. This is a glass ball. So it's not crystal, it's made of glass, because a proper crystal ball is extremely expensive. I mean, maybe one day I'll have the money and whatever that I can get a proper crystal ball, but they are extremely expensive. This is a glass crystal ball, and with this cool kind of witch broom stand. I think it was like $50 or $60. So again, not cheap, but a lot cheaper than the real thing. You can buy crystal ball or like glass balls for cheaper than that. Like it has more of a basic stand and stuff like that. A crystal ball is very old school, and it's the divination through sight. And so you use the crystal ball as a tool to direct your sight and let your mind go into the ball. And this is when you can see visions, get thoughts, hear things. Usually there's a part of a mild meditation involved when you're using a crystal ball. But a lot of it has to do with visions. That's the kind of the main purpose of using a crystal ball, is to get visions. Yeah. So that is another divination tool that I think needs to come back. Yeah, we should have some more crystal ball readers in the world, if you ask me. The last thing that I have here to give an example of is runes. And so my runes are made of plastic. These were gifted to me a long time ago. These are what would be considered Nordic runes. There are different types of runes. I've seen Icelandic, I've seen African, but Nordic is kind of the most common one that you'll see floating around online. You can also buy these made out of wood, crystal, bone, pretty much any natural material that you can think of, and of course plastic. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter what material the runes are on or made out of, however way you want to say it, unless it's a material that you are really in tune with or drawn to. This is another tool that I'm not super drawn to, so I haven't been inclined to make anymore, except for a future video. So I just use my little plastic ones that were gifted to me, and when I have used them, they've worked okay. Not the greatest, you know, not as good as my tarot cards, but they work just fine. The next one I'm going to mention is osteomancy, and this is the process of using bones to do a reading. This has also been called throwing bones in certain cultures, because you are throwing the bones to cast the reading. This can be using whole pieces of bones. This could be pieces of bones with different markings or runes or whatever on them. This is a practice that's been used for a long, long time in different ways and different forms over different cultures and geographical locations. And I will cover in more detail in a future video. Next one I want to talk about is scrying. And there's a few different ways that you can do scrying. There's using a black mirror, a candle flame, or just a fire flame. You can use water, oil. There's many different forms, but all of them are used in a way of eliciting visions. Very similar to the crystal ball, you're just using it to elicit visions. I will be making a couple of these in a future video to look at more detail about scrying, but that is another divination tool. Another form of divination is doing automatic writing. And this is another one that they've shown in a few horror movies. And this is where you go into kind of a meditative trance and write. But you're not writing, you're just letting your arm flow and just seeing what's coming out and kind of just translating what you're writing. I've done this sometimes, usually when I'm trying to get so much out, like if I'm trying to connect intuitively and I just have too much trying to come out at once, I'll use into automatic writing just to kind of get it organized on what's trying to come out. But it's not something that I do all the time. I don't start off doing automatic writing, but some people do. A lot of people use it as part of readings, like psychic readings or medium readings I've seen before. And that's a very cheap and easy way. You just need a pen and some paper. Another way that's actually very common, and people don't really think of it as being divination, is astrology and numerology. You're using this to try to predict the future or what's going around you in the present. And that's divination. You're trying to learn a message and gain information from powers that are above our physical world to either predict the future or guide you in your present day. And that, in the shortest definition, is a type of divination. There's also the Ouija board, which is very old school. And yes, it technically is a game that was made by a guy to make money and to sell it to kids as a game. But there are people who legitimately use it as a divination tool. Other tools that can be used for divination in different ways are dice, playing cards, like regular playing cards, dominoes, crystals, feathers, seashells, and the list goes on and on. There are obviously common tools like the ones I've mentioned. There are uncommon tools as well that many people use. So long story short, there's no right or wrong way to do divination. So long story short, there's no right or wrong way to do divination or to do readings and connect with the spiritual world. Whatever works for you is the right way. So I'm going to be doing follow-up videos where I'm either going to be doing DIYs or just talking about these different tools in more depth. For the tarot cards, I am periodically putting out those videos about the different cards and their meaning, but I will do a video just about how to do tarot readings, different spreads, and how to interpret a reading. So look out for those, and I will see you next time.